I thought it was just a ride home after the company dinner, a quiet, polite half-hour in the car. What Charles said that night pulled the map out from under my feet and made me see a whole different route for my life. Stick around. This one sentence changed everything. Before we begin, tell me, which cities are you watching from tonight? Drop them in the comments as you listen. I want to know who's out there with me. The rain started as a hush against the windshield and became a steady applause by the time Charles and I left the restaurant. He had insisted on driving me home after the firm's end-of-quarter dinner. That was his line, an old-fashioned courtesy he repeated like clockwork. I was tired and full of mashed potatoes and small talk, and all I wanted was my slippers and the quiet of my little house, where the lamp by the armchair waits the way a patient friend waits. I am Lisa. I'm 51. My hair is the kind of gray that slips into brown depending on the light. Tonight it was pulled back in a loose twist that had loosened further after dinner. I wore the navy dress I always save for when I want to be practical and elegant at the same time. Pockets that fit a phone and a business card and a little lipstick. Charles drove an old, sensible sedan that had seen better days. The upholstery still smelled faintly of cedar, and the car had a small dent on the passenger door that, for reasons I couldn't name, made it feel human. He drove like he held other people's lives inside his hands, careful, aware of the silences as much as of the speed. For most of the drive we traded the usual inventory of workplace news, a new client pitch, the intern who had a talent for spreadsheets, the way the copier seemed intent on personal vendettas. The city lights smeared through the rain into a watercolor of neon and sodium orange. I love that time in the car, the way names soften and stories unspool. There's a kind of privacy in moving through public spaces that feels honest and less staged than a living room with its family photos. Charles is older than me by a few years, a fact I had known the day I walked into the firm and saw him behind his desk with papers like a small fortress. He'd been my boss for more than a decade, considerate, exacting, the kind of man who notices whether the milk in the break room is labeled. He had that steady voice that could make a mistake feel fixable and praise feel like something earned, not tossed out to flatter. Over time, the public boundaries between us tightened into a pattern of mutual respect. Lunches that were sometimes private because we had to talk about a problem. A handshake that lasted an extra second when a deal closed. The guarded, polite laughter that employers and employees exchanged like a practiced dance. Tonight, though, something in the air, maybe the rain, maybe the soft blur of headlights, loosened the pattern. We'd been talking about small things, and then about nothing at all when he turned down a side road I didn't recognize. "Shortcut," he said, as if we'd taken it before. There was a quiet in his voice I hadn't heard in a long while, like the hidden register of someone who listens more than he speaks out of habit. "You seem quiet," I said. It had been a long week, and I knew how my face can betray a mind crowded with to-dos. He shrugged, the way someone does when a pocket contains too many coins and one drops to the floor. "It's just, sometimes I lose the thread," he admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and realize I've been following a path for so long I don't remember why the path began." He said the word path slowly, like a man sorting through an old drawer of letters. I was quiet then, because there was something honest in his voice that felt less like an announcement and more like a question posed to the dark between us. "I guess I never thought I'd still be." He paused, searching. "So surprised at how little control we have over how our days add up." There's something about an older man speaking with that kind of candor that makes you listen. Maybe it's because veterans of years learned that small confessions do not shatter their authority. They make it human. So I listened. We spoke about aging parents and the dry little rituals that make a house feel lived in. The squeak of a hallway board, the dish cup that always slips, the neighbor who puts out his garbage 3 hours early and stands by it like an offering. These are the domestic details that, to me, feel like the soft scaffolding of life. At some point he glanced at me, and the light from a passing street lamp caught his face, making his eyes look like layered brown glass. He had always had a careful face, one that furrows when he thinks, that crinkles at the edges when he smiles. That night there was something else in it, a weariness I had not seen before, and a tenderness that made me feel, absurdly, like a confidant in a play we hadn't rehearsed for. "Lisa," he said, and his voice folded into the space between us. "Do you ever think about things you didn't do? Not because you didn't want to, but because the timing was always wrong, or at least inconvenient." "Yes," I said. The answer came out of me before I could dress it up. "I suppose everyone has a trunk full of could-have beens." He laughed, small and rueful. "A trunk, that's a good way to put it. Mine has a broken latch." There it was, the pivot. His confession was not dramatic. It was not the kind of dramatic reveal movies stage with thunder. It was the slow unfolding of a man who had kept much to himself and decided, perhaps because the rain had been patient, to keep less now. "I've watched you for a long time," he admitted. "I've watched you lead, and step back, and take less so others can have more. I admired you. I still admire you. Maybe admiration is a poor disguise for what I actually felt." The scenery blurred into streaks of light. My heart did something like a cautious knock. There was so much wrapped up in those ordinary words. The years, the power dynamic, the canons of propriety, and the visible small kindnesses he had shown me in 1,000 small ways. But his voice carried nothing of pretense. It carried the exhaustion and straightforwardness of a man finally willing to be seen. "I should tell you the practical things, that I thought about work policy, about the office rumor mill, about how these stories can be taken apart and put back together by strangers who have never known the rhythm of a friendship that has been decades in the making. I thought about the ethics and the possibilities. I thought about whether this would change my daily walk into the office the way a fallen tree changes a path. I thought these things fast, precise as knitting needles. But mostly I felt what a human being feels when someone you respect tells you, plainly, that their life has an indentation your name fills, an ache of recognition, the startled flush of being seen, and a rising, unexpected warmth at the edges." "I don't know that I can say it any other way," Charles continued. "I've tried over the years to be careful because I value what we have. I value you. I value the team. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable or put you in a position to choose between your job and, well, anything. So I kept it in." He paused, and the car slid over a bridge with the river dark below. A single light from a distant tower blinked like a lighthouse. "Tonight," he said softly, almost to himself, "I realized that maybe silence is what has kept me from telling you the truth." The truth. The words were heavy, like a package passed between us. Suddenly the air in the car felt different, not charged with the scandal some might imagine, but dense with the gravity of a moment two adults had stepped into together. It was intimate but not possessive, respectful but real. "What is your truth?" I asked. My mouth felt strangely dry. My voice, when it came, sounded like it belonged to someone else. Perhaps that's the oddity of new confession. You are both the speaker and the listener, and the world compresses into the space between a heartbeat and the next. He looked at me then with an honesty that was disarming. "That I think you have been one of the kindest, bravest people I have been fortunate to work with. That I have, in my own clumsy way, been afraid of losing not just you, but the person you are. That I love you." Those last words arrived without fanfare. They were not shouted or proclaimed like a grand gesture. They were set carefully, like placing a delicate object on a table. For a moment everything became the small sound of rain and the hum of the engine. I saw his profile in the mirror, the gentleness of his nose, the way his hand rested on the wheel. There was no coercion in him, no sense that he expected a certain reply. He had simply offered himself honestly. My first thought was practical and pedestrian. The steering wheel had warmed his palms into a shade that spoke of miles of roads and perhaps a life steered with care. My next thought reached deeper. I thought about the ripples of choices, how a single sentence can make the water in a life rearrange itself. I thought about my own trunk of could-have beens and how many times I had turned the key and found the lock stubborn. "I didn't expect you to say that," I told him. It was not an answer, only a map. He nodded as if he had expected that too. "You don't have to respond now," he said. "I only wanted you to know. I didn't want to take advantage of the evening or of your kindness. I wanted to be honest." Honesty. It's a rare commodity, and when it comes in the quiet of an ordinary car at the end of a rain-slick night, it feels almost revolutionary. I thought about saying that I respected him, that I understood and needed time, that the office had rules and reputations and 1,000 little boundaries. I thought about saying nothing at all. Instead, I reached for the pocket of my dress and found my hands inside my handbags of rehearsed replies and folded them empty. "You surprised me," I said, "but I'm glad you told me. That means something." He exhaled, a sound of relief that seemed to loosen the car's air. It was not fireworks or tidy resolution. It was the beginning of a conversation being born in the dark, slow, carefully negotiated, human. By the time he pulled up in front of my house, the rain had softened to a mist that left the pavement shining. The porch light was on, a warm coin of gold in the wet night. I sat there a beat longer than necessary, the engine ticking as it cooled, and felt the aftershock of his words hum in my chest. I looked at him and realized that whether or not anything changed between us, something had. The map had been redrawn. "I'm sorry if I made this awkward," he said, his hands on the wheel as if steadying himself as much as the car. "You didn't," I answered. Truthfully, I could not say whether I wanted my life rearranged or kept as it was. I only knew that I had felt seen in a way that was not about being evaluated for work or judged for my choices. It was about being known. He opened the passenger door with the small, polite motion of a man who had always been mindful of details. For a second I hesitated, and then I leaned forward. The street smelled of wet pavement and cut grass. The porch light spilled across my shoes. He placed his hand briefly on the back of my wrist, a gesture that was both careful and oddly intimate, and when he did, I realized how much I trusted him in that small gesture. It was not a claim. It was a question. "Drive safe," he said. "I will," I answered. I stepped out into the mist and walked up my front steps with the strange buoyancy of someone who has had the rug shifted under her feet and felt no fall. I closed the door behind me and leaned with my forehead against the warm wood a moment, letting my breathing find its rhythm again. Inside, the lamp by the armchair was still waiting. I made a cup of tea like a prayer, the steam rising into the small lamp-lit room, and sat down with my hands wrapped around the mug. My mind ran through the evening as if it were a film, not to critique, but to catalog sensations, the tilt of his head when he spoke, the way his voice softened, the rain's persistent applause. I felt, beneath it all, a tender thrill and the gentle weight of responsibility. I did not have an answer. I had 1,000 small feelings that fit nowhere neat: surprise, curiosity, a flicker of desire, a conscience that kept time with prudence, and a quiet gratitude that someone I respected had trusted me enough to be honest. I had a map that had shifted, and I had, for the first time in a long while, a question that did not make my palms sweat so much as make them steady. Tomorrow at the office would be ordinary. There would be the hum of the copier and the scent of coffee and the steady business of deadlines. But tonight, in the hush of my living room, with the tea cooling at my fingertips, I felt the possibility of something that might be gentle and steady, or it might fold back into the life we'd known. Either way, I realized I was grateful for the truth. I thought it was just a ride home. Instead, it was the longest 20 minutes of my life, the kind that rewires the small interior of you and leaves you oscillating between fear and a new, careful hope. The morning after was ordinary in every way, except inside me. The alarm buzzed at 6:30, sharp and loyal, and I reached for it in the half-dark, feeling the ache in my shoulders that comes from both age and restless sleep. I made coffee, buttered toast, read the headlines that always seemed to repeat themselves with new names, and sat there wondering how many people were beginning their day with a private secret tucked against their ribs. Charles's words replayed in my head as I stirred sugar into my coffee. I love you. So simple. So unspectacular in delivery, and yet it shifted something tectonic. The kitchen smelled of toasted bread and the faint floral of dish soap. Outside, the neighborhood was damp, the rain having polished everything overnight. I tried to act as though I had control over my thoughts, but the truth was, they kept wandering back to the way his voice had softened, the steadiness of his eyes, the gentleness in the way he touched my wrist. At work, I dressed carefully. Navy slacks, cream blouse, hair pinned up more neatly than the night before. I told myself it was just professionalism, but if I'm honest, it was also armor. I didn't know what I would see in his face, or worse, what he might see in mine. The office looked the same as it always did, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the printer chewing through paper, the low murmur of voices over cubicle walls. But walking into that space felt different, as if the ground beneath me had been subtly tilted overnight. I caught sight of Charles' office door closed, blinds tilted half open. Just enough to glimpse him at his desk, head bent over a stack of papers, pen moving with his familiar precision. He looked like the same man as yesterday, focused, measured, but I knew something had cracked the surface. He must have felt me looking, because he lifted his head. Our eyes met through the slats. A pause, no more than a heartbeat, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken. Then he offered the faintest nod, the one he always gave in meetings when someone had made a point worth noting. It was professional, neutral, and yet I felt it differently now. I settled at my desk and tried to bury myself in numbers, memos, emails, but every keystroke seemed to tap out his words. I love you. I wondered how he could return to his paperwork so seamlessly, as though he hadn't opened a door between us the night before. Maybe that was his way. Carve out the truth, place it gently in someone else's care, and then return to the task at hand. Around noon, I found myself at the break-room counter, waiting for the coffee machine to cough out its last drops. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, steady, deliberate, like always. He came in with a folder in one hand, the other loosening his tie as if to remind himself he was still flesh, and not only authority. "Morning, Lisa," he said, tone light, professional, safe. "Morning," I echoed, and it felt both ordinary and loaded. He poured himself coffee, and for a moment we stood side by side, two adults with paper cups, the silence between us both familiar and foreign. Then quietly he said, "I meant what I said last night." The words were gentle but sure, placed where only I could hear them. My pulse quickened, though my face stayed composed. I turned to him, careful to keep my voice even. "I know." He searched my expression. Not demanding, not pressing. Just searching. "And I don't expect anything," he added. "I don't want you to feel pressured or—" "I don't," I interrupted, and it was true. Oddly true. I didn't feel trapped. I felt seen, and that was both terrifying and strangely calming. The machine beeped, and someone else walked in, breaking the moment. He nodded at me, the same polite nod as before, and stepped out. But I felt the air vibrate from his presence long after he left. The rest of the afternoon dragged. I noticed small things I'd never noticed before, the way his handwriting leaned slightly to the right, the way he listened with full attention when an employee spoke, even if it was something trivial. And I noticed, too, how carefully he kept his distance from me. Respectful. Always respectful. By the time the workday ended, I sat at my desk staring at my monitor, the light of the screen blurring into a haze. I was thinking about choices, about how many of them in life are made for you before you realize you even had the option to choose differently. At 51, I'd lived long enough to know that doors rarely open when you want them to. And when one does, do you walk through, or do you let it stay politely ajar and continue past it? I stayed late, pretending to finish reports. Truthfully, I was avoiding the moment of leaving. I didn't want a repeat of last night's car ride. I didn't know if my heart could stand it. But when I finally gathered my things, I saw the glow of his office still lit. I thought about slipping past, leaving quietly. But something in me resisted that. Instead, I tapped lightly on his open doorframe. He looked up. His expression was calm, but his eyes, they told a different story. Tired, yes, but also open, waiting. Still here? I asked, leaning on the frame as casually as I could manage. Paperwork never ends, he said with a half smile. You? Same excuse. For a moment we stood in silence, the kind that feels neither awkward nor easy, but necessary. I could feel the weight of choice